And so we pick up in Hebrews chapter 11. In verse 11, it says, by faith Sarah herself received power to conceive, even when she was past the age, since she considered him faithful who had promised. Therefore, from one man, and him as good as dead, were born descendants as many as the stars of heaven and as many as innumerable as grains of sand by the seashore. Listen to what it says about Abraham. It says at this point in his life, he was as good as dead. For everybody else, they had written him off. For everyone else, they said, man, this guy's so old, there's nothing else he could ever accomplish with his life. And so even the writer of Hebrews says this is how he's understood. They're from one man, and him as good as dead. For everybody else, man, his story was done being written. But I want us to understand no matter what challenges we go through right now, whatever it is, because for each one of us, we have a call of God upon our life. No matter where you're at, if you're a child of God today, you have a call of God upon your life. And God's call will always replace your something with his something better. But what happens is we start to put excuses up. And sometimes those excuses come from outside of people saying, you're too old, or you're too young, or you've messed up too much. And people are quick to write you off. But remember this, when those people are writing you off, God is saying, but that's only the first chapter. Your story's not done being written. Maybe you've made some huge mistake in your life. Maybe that's true of you. Listen, God's grace is so powerful, it can get you past that mistake. And often the voice that we have that's speaking these lies into our life is not a voice that's external at all. It's a voice that we start to believe because we're saying it to ourselves. It's a voice ultimately that comes from the enemy of God that's trying to convince us, you're not good enough. There's no way you could ever be used in a powerful way. And other people write us off, and sometimes we write ourselves off. And God says, but wait a minute. That's only the first chapter. You still have a whole lot more being written. For some people this morning, there's no doubt you've made some mistakes. Maybe even in the recent past, you've made some mistakes. And the best thing that you could do is to look at this passage and to see that, man, in Abraham's life, he had a bad chapter, but he closed the chapter. He said, that chapter is not going to define my life. God is still going to do something. And so he closes that chapter, and for some of you, the best thing you could do is to close this chapter in your life. And say, man, I've made some mistakes, and I've learned from those mistakes. Now it's time for me to repent, to change my life. And say, I'm not going to go back to the old way of living. But now that I've made that change, God's rewriting a redemptive story about my life. And that chapter that a couple of years ago was debilitating in my life will now be a strong reminder years from now of look at how far I've come, that God could transform who I used to be to who I am now.